Welcome to the video presentation of our paper, Ensemble of Sparse Gaussian Process Experts for Implicit Surface Mapping with Streaming Data. The work for this paper has been conducted at the Autonomous Mobile Manipulation Lab at the Center for Applied Autonomous Sensor Systems at Örebro University in Sweden. The goal of this paper is to estimate an implicit surface model, or an implicit surface map of an environment. An implicit surface model can be represented by a sign distance field or sign distance function, where the surface is indicated by the zero crossing of the distance function. That means that locations or positions outside or in front of the surface have positive distance, and locations behind the surface or inside an object have negative distance. Our goal is to estimate a sign distance map of a 2D environment from range measurements, as seen here in the video on the right hand side. This type of data usually comes as streaming data, which means that range measurements and scans arrive one after another, and we assume that this amount of data is too large to keep in memory at the same time. For this paper, we also assume that we have unknown poles of the range for each range measurement, and that the environment is static. That means that it doesn't change between different scans. On the right hand side, you can also see what a sign distance map or a sign distance model of this environment looks like. The red area indicates the area that is in front of the walls or in front of the environment surface, and the blue area is behind the surface. This also means that we have never observed the walls from the other side. The white area, or the white line actually, represents the surface in the environment. This type of model is usually well suited for scan matching or localization. The default approach to this kind of problem is to create some sort of grid cell model. That is a model where the space is tessellated and every cell saves the range measurement or the range information that is for this location where it is placed. For each range measurement, we are tracing the measurement beam and updating the cells that are crossed by the beam. This also means that the cells are usually treated independently, and we cannot infer the value of a neighboring cell from the surrounding cells. This usually gives poor generalization performance, and we cannot update cells which are not exactly on the path of the sensor measurement that we've observed. Another downside of this kind of method is that the representation has a fixed resolution, and if a representation in a higher resolution is required, we have to reprocess all the sensor data and create a new model. This type of model here is also parametric, and we have to maintain and update parameters for each cell separately. In comparison, we are proposing an ensemble of Gaussian process experts. That means that we are using Gaussian process regression to estimate the sign distance field continuously without a fixed resolution as the grid cell model. We are splitting up the environment into local areas for local Gaussian process experts, which are responsible for their local area of responsibility. The values in the Gaussian process regression are dependent on each other, and therefore we can update the model even though we don't have observations directly in a specific position, and we can fill in gaps of missing data, and we can deal with sparse observations. The type of model we are choosing is a non-parametric model, and we can therefore decide the number of parameters we want to use, and we can decide to spend the parameters on interesting features in environments, such as the locations where the surface is, and do not use model parameters to represent free space as the grid-based model would do. The contributions of this paper could be summarized by saying that we have a continuous sign distance estimation with this model that is not dependent on a certain resolution in a grid. Our representation can generalize from sparse observation data, and our model represents the environment in a resource-efficient way, only spending resources or model parameters on important features. We also propose an algorithm which can construct this type of model in an incremental way from streaming data, and this algorithm is practically scalable to large environments and large amounts of data. The basis for our approach is the local Gaussian process expert. We are using here an approximation of the full Gaussian process that is based on pseudo inputs. That means that if we have a range measurement of a large amount of points, we can represent this range measurement locally by a small amount of pseudo inputs. These models allow also the addition and the removal of pseudo inputs to the model. The model can also be updated from the measurements that arrive later. This small amount of pseudo inputs is then sufficient to predict or to give an approximate prediction of the sign distance fields around the area where the measurement data has been collected. In our approach, we're using a covariance function that is called thin plate spline kernel that provides smooth surface estimation and can also provide estimation from sparse input data. The reason why the estimation or the prediction of the surface is smooth is that this kernel minimizes the second order derivative of the predicted function, and that leads to a slow change in curvature. You can see this when the model is filling in data that hasn't been observed yet. On the right hand side you see here a few data points, and you can see the prediction of the sign distance field that the model does. In these areas that are indicated, the predicted function is very smooth and tries to connect to the other data points. Our algorithm operates more largely on the local experts, and we will explain this by considering the local experts, which is indicated here by the green pseudo inputs. If a new data set arises, we can check whether the local expert makes the correct predictions for the places where the range measurement indicates a zero crossing of the sign distance function. All of the points that we see here as red laser scan endpoints should have a small sign distance because they are supposed to be ending at the surface. Our model does not make the correct predictions, and therefore we are extending the model by adding these measurement endpoints into the set of pseudo inputs of our local model. Having extended the model for these areas, we can now update the model with the measured range at these points, which is 0. And therefore the model then adapts to predict the correct distance at this location. However, the model has now increased, and continuously increasing the model with new measurements usually leads to large models that are not tractable. We therefore present a method for contracting the model and removing pseudo inputs by considering the error that is introduced by removing these points. If the model is still too large, we then go and subdivide the model into a set of smaller models, which are then tractable again for prediction. However, these models then have to be harmonized so that they agree with their sign distance prediction at the edges of their areas of responsibility. Our algorithms has a set of different parameters. One set of parameters that are controlling the error thresholds for inserting pseudo inputs and removing pseudo inputs from local experts, and another set of parameters which controls the maximum and minimum size of local experts. Setting these parameters to different values will provide very different models. With small error tolerances, we obtain models which are placing the pseudo inputs densely and try to precisely model the observed features. If the error tolerances are larger, the models are covering a larger the local experts are covering a larger area of space and follow the features of the environment more loosely. But they are still placing the model resources, that is the pseudo input locations, at the places where the features and the environment require it most, that is, for example, at corners. Another interesting consideration is the amount of measurement noise. Keeping the parameters of our approach constant, we will receive different type of models with different amount of noise. If we have no noise, our models will look as we just explained. But if the amount of noise increases, the algorithm locates increasingly more local models, and the models have increasing denser pseudo inputs. This is because the algorithm assumes that the noise that is observed through the measurements are actually features in the environment that we wish to represent. This means that we have to adapt the parameters of our approach to the type of measurable noise we observe in the environment. More details about our approach are found in the manuscript. This goes for the formulas for updating and maintaining the local experts, the algorithm which incrementally constructs the overall model, comparison to other approaches and baselines, and extended evaluations. There's also an extended version of our manuscript on arXiv.